I'm back. Mr. Clarke's back. Time to take a look at some of the popular cultural developments during the 1980s, see how things are shifting. When you look at the 1980s, a lot of people consider the 1980s to be the me generation, a generation where, for the first time, Americans are really putting their own self above others as they're attempting to really move forward with a lot of the luxuries and seeing how they can, kind of exploit society for their own gain, not only in terms of individual purchases, but even more so, as you can even see in the Time magazine cover. A lot of your big business owners are attempting corporate takeovers, meaning they're attempting to take over other companies. They're looking to buy other companies out. Mega mergers was something that was really popular during this period of time, and we're seeing the 1980s to really be the decade where we're really seeing for the first time many billionaires emerge for the very first time. Just a quick reminder, just make sure you're filling out the PowerPoint topics in Google Classroom, which you'll be submitting after you go through my video lesson. There he is. You know him. You may or may not love him. Donald Trump. Of course, Trump was a person very similar to what I described before, somebody who was really interested in building up his own wealth during the 1980s. He's kind of an example of the rise of the rich and famous business person during the 1980s. Trump stated in his book, and you can see the book there, Trump, The Art of the Deal. I don't do it for the money. I've got enough, much more than I'll ever need. I do it to do it. He just does it. Deals are his art form. Other people paint beautifully on canvas or write wonderful poetry. I like making deals, preferably big deals. So there's Trump there. That's when he kind of started moving up, invested in a lot of properties, eventually began building casino in Atlantic City here in New Jersey. And obviously we know the rest is history. Reaganomics, obviously we looked a little bit at Reaganomics already when we looked at some of the policies of President Reagan. Reagan, of course, is president from 1981 to 1989. So when you think about the 1980s, it's really Reaganomics, which is the economic system that is benefiting some within society, but a lot of people would argue did not benefit all. So it says here the economic distance between rich and poor, between the well-paid and the poorly paid, is higher today than at any time in the lifetimes of all but our most senior citizens, the veterans of the Great Depression. So some would argue that the gap between the haves and the have-nots, the very wealthy and rich and the poor kind of expanded during the 1980s. It was during this period of time, too, in the 1980s, where TV really began to celebrate the wealth in the 1980s, with shows like Dynasty, Dallas, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. Some of these TV shows have actually been redone in your lifetimes. Dallas had a remake maybe about 5 years ago for about a 2 or 3 year period of time. And most recently, Dynasty, which was a very popular 1980s TV program, is being redone on CW. Also, during this period of time, we saw the rise of the yuppie. Not sure if that's a term you had heard of prior to your studies here of the 1980s. But yuppies were very popular during this period of time. Yuppie stands for Young Urban Professional, kind of an informal nickname, sometimes known as the Yups or the Yuppies during the 1980s. I think they made the Yuppies opposed to Yup, just because Yuppies kind of a little better sounding name than just Yup. And Yup kind of sounds a little bit like you're saying yep. Term used to describe someone who is young, possibly just out of college, who has a high-paying job and an affluent lifestyle. Today, a yuppie can be used to describe just about any rich person who is not modest about their financial status. The yuppie, I'm going to drive my Ferrari to the seafood place to have my $500 lobster dinner. Many of them drove fancy cars, had private jets that could kind of take them across the nation at a moment's notice. Here's some images of the yuppie. First on the right side, before I go to the yuppie handbook, At the very top there, you have somebody on one of the earliest cell phones in the 1980s, nicknamed the Brick, just because how big it is. Obviously, not something that's going to conveniently fit in your pocket. A center photo on the right there, that's the interior of a private jet that was taking people across the country. And then the luxury automobile, bottom right corner, is the I'm not sure what year that is, maybe 84, 1980s BMW. So people are paying not necessarily for the car itself, but rather than mostly paying for the emblem that's on the front of the car there, the BMW logo. The Yuppie Handbook, the state-of-the-art manual for young urban professionals. The male dressed there in a pinstripe suit. Cross pen, that'd be a pen that would be, let's say, a $50 pen. The Rolex watch. The squash racket at the racquetball club. The Gucci briefcase. His prospectus to make money. Woman here, Ralph Lauren suit. Cartier watch. Coach bag. Gourmet shopping bag, the running shoes, and then she would put on her high-heeled shoes when she got to the office. And the Sony Walkman, the earbuds there, or headphones during this period of time in her ears. Sony Walkman is how you played a recorded cassette tape. We'll look more at the Walkman as we move forward. The splurge generation, people were taking their extra money and they were buying a wide variety of luxury items that you see pictured to the right. Binge buying on credit, became a way of life during the 1980s. Shop till you drop was the watchword or catchphrase at the time. Labels are everything. More important what it said on the exterior of your item than it would be in the interior. Tom Wolfe dubbed this baby boomers as the splurge generation. Video games, VCRs, the Sony Walkman, minivans, camcorders, talk TV shows all became part of our lives in the 1980s. The decade, which had begun as double-digit inflation, turned out to be one of the biggest spending decades in American history. So that's the Walkman there. So you can see there the cassette tape. Hopefully you're familiar with a cassette tape. It goes in the Walkman. You have the play buttons up here, fast forward, things like that. You have the headphones you would wear with that. And the Walkman would cost during this period of time in history, $150 for a Walkman. The right side was the first video game system I received in my life. I got the Atari 2600 in 1982. I'm sure it was around that same price, and $129.99, obviously quite a bit more in terms of value in the 1980s than it would be in today's society. So it was really expensive, probably the equivalency of maybe $500 for a video game system today. Here is a VCR. You put a tape in there, you can record programs, you can watch recorded videos on here. Very much similar to like a DVD player that we have today, but a little bit more primitive. I referenced Dynasty before. Dynasty TV show during the 1980s. It promoted wealth, affluence, excess, the exploitation of the lower classes by the wealthy. Remade in contemporary times on the CW. So Dynasty, that's from the TV program there. That's kind of the opening scene, and these are the characters here. That's Blake Carrington and his family here. I think he's got multiple wives there that are within that photo, and then some of his children. Just a little, quote here. Two guys talking at an adult beverage facility there, or bar. It's not about the money per se. It's about the inner beauty of the woman earning it. So talking about perhaps meeting a woman and not necessarily caring so much about who she is or what type of person she is, but rather how much money she made during that period of time. And that was more typical, obviously, here in the 1980s. Greed is Good. The film Wall Street during this period of time is remembered as the ultimate portrayal of the 1980s excess, with Michael Douglas, pictured to the far left. His character, memorably declaring that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. It also has proven influential in inspiring people to work on Wall Street, to go there for pure profit's sake. All right, so we look here, blue-collar workers, declining standard of living. So if you're like a factory worker or somebody who, is a wage earner or wage laborer, that standard of living was going down in the 1980s. A lot of problems in inner cities as well, the influx of immigrants, ethnic polarization. Inner city unemployment back then and even today seems to be higher still than other parts of society. Obviously, during a pandemic, unemployment's high everywhere, but traditionally in normal times, city life still has a higher rate of unemployment. We also saw for the first time, really in the 1980s, a high incarceration rate for especially men of color, African Americans, Latino Americans, in prison at a much higher rate than Caucasian Americans back then and even into contemporary times 40 years later. As I mentioned before, not everyone got rich during this period of time. Reagan declared a war on drugs during this period of time. In fact, I think we discussed in class previously that every first lady, and you see in the photograph on the bottom left, that's Ronald Reagan and his wife Nancy Reagan. Every first lady has an initiative that they work on. And during this period of time, during the Reagan administration, Nancy's campaign was to combat the use of drugs. And she came up with a very simple campaign, just say no to drugs, kind of, a no tolerance policy. Nobody should use drugs. And that was kind of the simple campaign that the Reagan administration, with Nancy Reagan as its chairperson, emphasized. So Nancy Reagan declared the Just Say No campaign, very similar to, let's say, Michelle Obama, who worked on fitness and nutrition during her 8 years as First Lady with President Obama. Laura Bush, during the 8 years that George W. Bush was president, from 2001 to 2009, her initiative was a reading initiative to get children to read. As a former librarian, Laura Bush worked on that as her particular initiative, and this, of course, here was Nancy Reagan's. Kermit the Frog, the Muppet character. Kermit didn't find it easy to be green. It's kind of a quote from Kermit, if you're familiar with the Muppets. During this period of time, too, this is a kind of a reference here to the high rate of hospital costs, which rose. We lost a lot of people because of lack of access to health care. Also, too, during this period of time, the first time that we're really dealing with AIDS, which before the decade ended had spread to African American communities, Hispanic women, unemployment. Also, when you look at the spread of AIDS, it was also spread to the drug community, people who shared needles. And then during this period of time, too, of course, we had a high issue of unemployment. 1980s families changed drastically during these years. The 1980s continued the trends of the 1960s and 70s. Divorce rate was going up, more unmarried people living together, more single-parent families or households. The two-earner family was even more common than in previous decades. One positive, more women were earning college degrees and advanced degrees. Women were moving forward in regard to the workplace. You can see even here for the first time, too, a lot of dads were staying home to raise children. That was kind of the first time here in the 1980s. Until next time, Mr. Clarke is out.